Hello and a very warm welcome to the Ideas Factory. I am Naghma. Joining me is Professor Pant. We will be looking at all the important developments around the world and how does it affect us and how is it reshaping the world order in a way. We will be looking at all those stories, including China, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, along with the UN Secretary General's visit to India, and much more on this episode of the Ideas Factory. A very warm welcome to you, Harsh. And I want to begin with your comments on China, on President Xi Jinping's address when he addressed the Congress, which is once in 5 years, and this time seemed a little more aggressive. It has been said that he does not just want to become Mao, he wants to surpass Mao. What was the difference that you saw if you look at speech 5 years back, what he spoke then, and from what he speaks now? He's also talking about a more authoritarian China, reading in various analysis all around. There are two major differences. Like one of the reports says that there is an addition. There's also an effort to rewrite some sections on the ideology. And now he talks about a new frontier in adapting Marxism to the Chinese context and the needs of the times. How has China's vision changed, and what is Xi Jinping trying to do at the same time? There are a lot of protests also that are erupting against the Chinese government within China, interestingly, and outside, of course.
Yes, I think it has been. It certainly has been an interesting Congress, but I think by and large the vision that Xi Jinping is laying out is pretty consistent from what he has been showcasing for the last decade. So what he did this time around was to also lay out his achievements, because this is after a decade he was laying out what China has achieved, how he has taken China closer to the goals that he had set out for China in terms of what he calls the national rejuvenation of China. And in that, I think he's linking things like, whether it is Taiwan, whether it is Hong Kong, whether it is the COVID strategy that he has played an important role. And what was striking was that there was, everything seems perfect as far as he was concerned, that every step that China has taken has gone according to a particular script that he ostensibly is claiming he wrote. Now, I think as you were mentioning, we know that there is growing discontent within China, unprecedented. This kind of banner protests that started from one city and now have reportedly spread to other cities as well. They underscore the simmering discontent particularly with economic and health policies that he has followed. So I think there are tensions within China. But what his speech was about was to assert his confidence of taking China forward, his confidence that he's the best man positioned to take it forward, and his confidence that the world has reached a point where a unique confluence of factors make China the inevitable power. And in that sense, while he acknowledged that, look, there is a new constellation of forces that China has to adapt to globally. He seemed, very confident that things are moving in the right direction. And he also laid out very interestingly a roadmap for some of the domestic changes in education, in certain kinds of infrastructure, in certain kinds of domestic investments, particularly in science and technology, that he has to make, or that China has to make as it moves forward. So I think, by and large, it was very Xi Jinping-like speech, which articulated a vision for the future, even as I think it underscored how well China has done under his helpsmanship. So I think there is no, there are no second thoughts there. There is no reflection there that, look, what is happening in Taiwan, what has happened in Hong Kong may have some impact as far as Taiwan is concerned. But I think one of the most striking things also was clearly how he positioned Taiwan at the very beginning of his speech, and clearly he sees his role in terms of bringing Taiwan back into the fold of mainland, and he sees his role as critical in that regard. So he's mentioning that, and he's mentioning it up front. He's making it a visible part of Chinese dream, and in some ways that also tells you that nationalism is going to be a major force for the Chinese Communist Party going forward, particularly as domestic discontent is growing on economic front, on health front, on social front. I think a more aggressive China on the global stage is going to be very, very visible. And of course, there is going to be implications. There are going to be implications for everyone around Chinese periphery, including India.
Of course, there is a more aggressive China that we see, but how does it affect the world, and what would be the world's reaction? We've also heard, and we're reading about the Japanese buildup. We're also looking at what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. The Russia and Ukraine war is escalating further. The situation is getting worse. In fact, Indian government has issued an advisory for the Indians to actually leave Ukraine. We've also seen that Russia has been using the kamikaze drones and the missiles and the rockets are coming in front. But Iran, of course, it does not matter to Iran whether there is any warning that's being given out to Iran. Situation is getting worse. We're also seeing reports of the Sukhoi 57 that is being used now to target the ground targets, the air targets. The situation is there, and the war is all about now Putin's ego, isn't it? So the war is not ending, and the world is looking at a bigger disaster. So, a more aggressive China, a very aggressive Russia. Where are we heading?
Yes, it's quite quite a situation as far as the international constellation of forces are concerned, and I think that's where what is interesting is that China can have a plan, or Xi Jinping may have a plan for China, but the reality is something very different. I mean, if you look at the economic numbers that China is facing, and then they don't look very good at the moment, I think the reality is that those numbers should be worrying to China, and they are worrying to China, and therefore China has not been very enthusiastic about this war. We know that they have expressed concerns to Putin about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So I think clearly what is happening globally will have an impact on great power politics, or will have an impact on Chinese aspirations and desire to play a larger global role. But I think what is striking is that on the Russia-Ukraine front, we are seeing an escalation, and of course it is also a sign of certain kind of a desperation in Russia, that things have not gone according to the plan. We are now looking at the evacuation of Russians from Kherson, where Ukrainian forces are closing in, and this was accepted by the new Russian defense chief. So clearly, in some ways, the challenge for Russia is how can it escalate without actually bringing in more retribution from the West. And for Ukraine, the issue is how far can it go towards eventually what looks like a massive scale destruction of Ukraine. Of course, for Ukraine, it's a question of sovereignty and survival. For Russia, it's a question of merely expansionism. So I think there are issues here which perhaps the international community should be thinking more categorically about. Unfortunately, nothing is happening on that front, and the battle lines, the fault lines as they are being drawn on the battlefield are becoming starker by the day, and it doesn't look like that there is going to be any reconsideration, at least on Mr. Putin's part, anytime soon. He's insistent that he's on the right track. He's insistent that he continues to move from one thing to another. First, he annexed the 4 regions. Then he's declared martial law from one of the regions. Now he's asking people to leave in Kherson. So I think there are tensions which are building up in a way that may lead to miscalculation, or that may lead to some kind of an accident that can reverberate across the region. And so things are moving in a particularly vulnerable direction. And this is happening at a time when global economy is once again under pressure. We know the numbers from Russia are not that good. We know the numbers from economic numbers from the US are not looking that great, and the eurozone is facing a problem. So I think by and large, if you look at the global economic landscape, it does not need this kind of disturbance. But of course, Mr. Putin has other ideas, and he doesn't. He's not relenting. So I think that the larger issue here is that the great powers, the Chinese may have a game plan for their own view on the world. They may have a game plan about their own rise, but often these game plans don't go according to what is written in certain documents. And we have also seen, for example, American national security strategy that came out a few weeks back that talks of China as the most important threat. And of course, while it talks of Russia, but it talks of Russia as a more immediate problem, but China is a larger threat, larger problem, strategic problem. And that's where you see how great power contestation is becoming more seminal to our times, is becoming more central to our contemporary world politics, where US and China are now categorically declaring their intent to move forward in a manner in which they would like to pursue a more antagonistic policy towards each other, both politically, diplomatically, militarily, but also very strikingly economically. We have had America that has brought in some of the most stringent export control laws against China when it comes to the supply of chips. And this is going to have a massive impact on the way technology flows go around the world. So I think we are looking at a very differently constituted global order, which will have consequences for everyone, including the major powers, and of course for countries like India that are trying to somehow contain the damage that is happening damage from elsewhere, and continue to push towards a path of more development focused, more internal consolidation. But that is going to be very difficult as things become difficult in the global landscape.
Things are getting very difficult in the global landscape. And if you look at Russia, it seems like Russia is not really bothered about the retributions coming in from the West. The war is also a lot about it's Putin's war, and Putin is nowhere close to relenting. We've also seen the crisis, the situation, the difficulties that lie ahead for the people of Ukraine as winter sets in. There's a power outage because Russia is actually bombing the power plants too. And it's going to be a very difficult time. But there is also a difficult time that the UK is facing with escalating political crisis there, Harsh. The countries around too, the trade deals. Look at what happened between the India-UK trade deal, Harsh.
Oh yes, I think, and that's from India's perspective, I think that's a big loss, because the government, London is today so consumed by domestic dysfunctionalities that it has little time for these ambitious projects. And this was one of the most ambitious trade deals that India has been undertaking, that India has been negotiating. And at one point, it looked as if Diwali would be the time when this was signed. There were even reports that Indian Prime Minister would travel to London and sign this deal, given how close at one point it seemed to be there on the table. But two things happened. One, of course, the Home Secretary, who has just resigned recently, even I think in the last few hours, she scuppered it to a certain extent by linking it up with migration, with the issue of migration. There was always an understanding that skilled migration, this arrangement that without that, India really does not have much of a stake in this deal. And she basically linked it to many Indians overstaying in India and the migration problem. And she, I think, was also positioning herself as a future leader of the Conservative Party, where migration is a big issue. So I think that in a way destroyed the deal. But what also vitiated the atmosphere, at least not destroyed the deal, that vitiated the atmosphere in India. But also now that the government is in so much trouble, it's very unlikely that they have the political capital to spend on this deal, which is needed at this particular moment when the deal looks very iffy. So I think India can only wait and watch. It is not in India's hands.
Absolutely. So whatever the political uncertainty, the difficulty there, and Britain is so consumed by its own political challenges, domestic challenges, that really everything else is at the back burner right now. But a quick comment before we end the program or this episode on External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Egypt, 2-day official visit. A lot happened in terms of trade and commerce. We know India and Egypt have enjoyed very good relationship. As far as the cultural ties are concerned, we've been very close. India enjoys a lot of goodwill in Egypt, and now going forward, the potential to increase the trade and commerce between the two countries. And how would you assess this visit and the deals that took place there?
This was an important visit, I think, because India has not really engaged Egypt very substantively over the last few years. So finally, what we saw was India's engagement with Egypt at a level where perhaps it is needed. It is such an important player in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region. And as India's equities increase in the Middle East, as India increases its presence in the Middle East and North Africa region, I think having a solid, substantive relationship with Egypt is a sine qua non. And we have seen how transformative changes have taken place in this part of the world over the last few years. And so India positioning itself as one of the most important, as one of the most significant actors in the region, has to ensure that its ties with Egypt remain substantive and on an even keel. And I think two aspects stood out. One was, of course, this talk of agriculture, agricultural trade. I think the foreign minister mentioned the fact that after a hiatus, India and Egypt have engaged in agricultural trade, and that is something that I think should be given careful consideration going forward. But also, I think the defense engagement between India and Egypt should be revived, has been revived to a certain extent, and that's good news because Egypt is also now looking for a diversification. Egypt is looking for new players to partner with, and as Egypt looks at the changing realities in the MENA region, I think substantive engagement with India for Egypt also becomes very, very important. And I think that's what we saw during this visit, both sides extending their hands and accepting and acknowledging each other's importance. So I think it has been a good start, and given India's growing involvement in this part of the world, it certainly should be India-Egypt ties should be an important anchor in that context.
And Egypt is a key player there in that region. And of course, as Jaishankar pointed out, there is a world of possibility there. And before we end, UN Secretary General is here in India. He's made a few comments. He's also praised India for the role that India played during COVID, the kind of help that India extended to the neighbors, praised the COVID app, but also made a comment on human rights here.
Yes, I think Secretary General's visit, as you would expect, Secretary General would talk about a range of issues, and I think he has been talking about a range of issues about India's role in the multilateral order, and also I think for him it's par for the course to raise all kinds of issues. Some of them would be taken, I think some of them are appreciative of India's role. Most of them are actually, in terms of what India has been able to do, India's leadership role. But also, I think India's distrust with in some ways with the extant multilateral system. India's there's a certain sense in which India wants changes, and those changes are not happening in the global multilateral order. So he, as a representative, as the focal point of that multilateral order, will have to respond to some of those issues as he takes back his assessment of where India is, given how central India has become in terms of the global multilateral system and how engaged India has been with the process. I think those sensitivities will have to be kept in mind. But of course, it is also incumbent upon him to talk about certain issues where India may feel a bit uncomfortable, which India may feel fall within the purview of what India might consider domestic imperatives of India. But I think for a UN Secretary General, he has to raise those issues, and India will have to respond in a manner that befits India's role as a leading player in the international system.
All right. So on that note, that's it from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you so much for joining, Harsh. And from our viewers, we would expect your comments and what all would you like to like us to talk about. We'll see you soon on the next episode. Thank you for being with us.